Welcome to the Thriving on Purpose podcast, where we teach Christian entrepreneurs how to build a strong foundation of faith, growth, and skill to lead and thrive on purpose in life and business. And now, here are your hosts, certified coaches Elisabeth and Sebastien Richard.
Hi everyone, thanks for joining us for this first historical episode of Thriving on Purpose. I'm putting on a little drama here. It's not really historical, but for us, for me and Lizzie, in our lives, it's really, really cool and it's really, really exciting because we've been working for a couple of months easy on bringing you this podcast. And today's first episode is going to be about God's Bootcamp.
Yeah, so what is the definition of a boot camp?
Well, a boot camp, obviously, if people are in any way, shape, or form familiar with the Army, it's where the recruit soldiers go to be fully ready for real life combat. So it's basically a training that's going to be extremely difficult and demanding, but it's on purpose, and it's to make them ready for real life combat situations. So that's why it's so demanding. If it were easy, when they would get into the real life war situations, they wouldn't survive 2 minutes. So that's why boot camps are so grueling and demanding and very, very stern.
And so why does God put us through boot camps? What is the purpose of God putting Christians through boot camps?
Well, I'm going to speak from an entrepreneurial point of view here. I think that when God puts a Christian entrepreneur through a boot camp, it's to prepare him or her for what they're about to undertake, what they're about to do, what their mission is going to be, with what their vision is, what they're going to build. So it is my belief, and I think it's yours too, Lizzie, that the bigger the mission has for you, chances are the more demanding the boot camp's going to be.
Definitely. The bigger the mission, the harder the boot camp.
Definitely. Exactly. I like that saying. The bigger the mission, the harder the boot camp. And if we go scripturally, we can take the example of Moses. Moses first started his life. Of course, he was born as a slave, but that didn't stay very long. That didn't remain very long because right away his mom put him in that basket, and he was found by Pharaoh's daughter. And from a very young age, as a baby, he was raised in and pampered in a palace. So he was a prince in Egypt, and he was raised with all the perks that can bring: the best food, the best bed, the best education, the best rank, position, and respect from his peers and all that. So all that came attached to his position in Egypt. And in Acts chapter 7, in verse 22, it said it's Stephen's sermon. Stephen says this, and he says, "And Moses was learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians, and was mighty in words and deeds." And it's interesting when you read that, because around that age, Moses was around 40 years old. He was at his peak, I guess you could say, in social standing. He was a prince in Egypt. He had been taught from a young age all the wisdom of the Egyptians. And I know as Christians, when we hear that, all the wisdom of the Egyptians, so he's taught in pagan crap. No, I don't see it like that. There was a lot of strong earthly wisdom in the Egyptian writings. If anybody is familiar with some of them, I've read some of them, and that are extra biblical, and you can really definitely see there's some solid foundations of wisdom there. And so basically he was taught in wisdom, in scholarly knowledge. So he had extensive knowledge, and he was brought up in a position of leadership. So he knew how to lead people. He understood the customs. He understood the wisdom of the time, all the highest knowledge available at the time. So he was in a great position. And when he came across the Egyptian who was beating on a Hebrew slave, and the story tells us that he killed him, and I think it's the next day or a couple of days later, he met two Hebrew slaves fighting together.
Right.
And he came to break up the fight, and he says, "Hey, brothers, why are you fighting amongst yourselves?" And then he was found out, because they basically told him to his face, "Who put you as a judge over us?" And he like, "Are you going to kill us like you did that Egyptian?" And when they said that, he got scared, like big time. He was like, "Oh boy, I didn't hide my crime. Someone saw me." So he got scared and ran off.
Right.
And he thought, see, that's the special thing is, sometimes you think you're ready for a task, until God brings you into his boot camp.
And that's what's interesting about this, is that you would think that God naturally could have just taken him out of that foundation that he, had learned all these things from his position, and bring him directly to, delivering the people, because now his eyes are opened up and he's seeing that what the Pharaoh's doing is wrong and all that. But yet God decided he was not ready for the huge mission ahead.
And this goes back to the quote we said earlier: the bigger the mission, the harder the boot camp.
Right.
Well, Moses' boot camp was not his years of training in Egypt. It was just part of his prep for the boot camp. Because when he ran away, he was 40. When he came back to deliver the people, he was 80. So that was 40 years later. And what was the boot camp made of? Well, it was basically made of taking the man who thought he was ready, and breaking him to a position in which he would be actually usable by God. So it broke his pride. And I mean, you can't throw the stone at Moses for being proud. I mean, come on. If any of us was raised in a palace as a prince in Egypt with all the knowledge that he had, obviously you must be puffed up in some way or another. It must be hard to remain humble. But God needed a humble man to do what he was going to have to do as the deliverer.
Right.
So he brought him to the desert to become a shepherd for 40 years. And he wasn't even a shepherd in his own business. It wasn't his own sheep business. He was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law. So he was working for his father-in-law, basically. And for any man, I mean, if men are listening out there, for any man, that's kind of hard. I mean, working for your dad is one thing, because you're going to inherit the business someday, and it's like you're being groomed to possibly take over someday. But working for your father-in-law, you're kind of working for someone who built something before you, and you have no guarantee it's going to become yours someday. So that must have been a humiliating experience for Moses. And it was so humiliating, and I like the passage again. We go back to Acts 7:22, where it says that Moses was learned, and he was mighty in words and deeds. And it's interesting because once he was broken after those 40 years, and God appeared to him in a burning bush, and he said, "I'm going to send you over there, and you're going to deliver my people." One of the first things that Moses said, "Who am I that you should send me?" And he was like, "I stutter. I have this problem. I can't speak properly."
Right. He felt inadequate.
He felt completely inadequate. So the guy who was mighty in words and deeds back in Egypt, all of a sudden was so broken, so humiliated after those 40 years. And it was part of God's plan. And yet he got mad after Moses being so hesitant more than once. And then he said, "Who made men's mouths to speak?" And then he assigned Aaron, his brother, to speak for him. But all this to say that Moses was not the same man once he went back to Egypt as the day he left. I mean, when he left, he felt, as from a human standpoint, he felt he was ready. But from God's schooling, from God's boot camp standpoint, he wasn't ready. And that's God's boot camp.
And also from a leadership perspective, you have these people that have seen him, amongst pharaohs. The trusting factor was not there either. They didn't know who he was. I mean, they knew he was, an Israelite like them from birth, but what they had seen was the contrary. They saw him as an Egyptian for many, many years, right?
Yeah.
So I think also the whole time in the desert and all that boot camp for those people was also to work their hearts, because I think that from a leadership perspective, God had to work their hearts to see him as a leader. You have a man that's you're not sure about what God wants to do, and he's following God and he's following his steps, but he had to grow in that leadership position to really trust God and not man, because he was used to trusting man before.
Yeah, and it's an interesting angle you bring, because not only was God preparing the leader, but he was also preparing the people to receive the leader. So that's very, very interesting that you say that, because they did initially, when he was 40, they did see him as this guy who's working for the enemy. Well, because basically they were oppressed. Minds, they were oppressed by the Egyptians, right? So like, who established you as a judge over us, really? Like, so that 40 years was necessary for Moses himself, but also for the people.
Right.
They had to welcome him with open arms, and they were ready when he came. I mean, they were ready. They were starving for deliverance. Not that they weren't before, but they weren't ready for him. They were ready for deliverance. They just weren't ready for it to come from him.
Exactly. And
I think it's an interesting, very interesting point of view. And there's a few quotes that I wanted to share with the audience about God's boot camp, that have to do with God's boot camp, how God preps us oftentimes through hardship to prepare us for the mission we're supposed to fulfill or accomplish. There's one by Alan Redpath. It says this: when God wants to do an impossible task, he takes an impossible man and crushes him. Now, that's definitely what happened to Moses. Yeah. A.W. Tozer. Want to share that one, Lizzie? The one with A.W. Tozer?
Yeah. It is doubtful that God can use a man greatly until he has hurt him deeply. When I first heard that, I was like, wow. There's a lot of truth when you think about that quote.
Yeah, and that sums up a lot of what we go
great
through.
men and in history that you read their stories.
Most of them were hurt
quote.
Deeply.
Yeah.
It's fascinating. The great lives of great men, like you said.
Right.
There's always a huge suffering component to it. Gene Edwards, another good quote: God has a university. It's a small school. Few enroll, even fewer graduate. So those were the quotes I wanted to share with the audience. Basically, God's boot camp, it breaks us, it teaches us, and most of all, it equips us for the task that is set before us. And for Christian entrepreneurs, that can take on a very special meaning. It can mean that if you want to build a Christ-centered, Christ-honoring, or quote-unquote Christian business, it can prepare you for that. But it can also help you, if you're a Christian, to build a secular business that will still honor God. And I think that can be, in some ways, even harder than building a Christian business. Because when you build a Christian business, you know you're going to serve the people of God. That's what you're set out to do, and you're very clear on what's going to happen. But when you build a secular business in today's world, and I have in mind Chick-fil-A, for example, the founder was Christian, and he built a business based on Christian values. And a few years back, when he took a stand, I don't remember what it was exactly. I think it was he didn't want to hire homosexuals, or I'm not too sure. But in any way, he became very controversial, and the media ate him up. And it was something that I learned a lot from watching the integrity and the strength of character of the founders, because I was like, ouch. Now that is tough. I mean, standing strong in the midst of such controversy, when you're all over the news, all over the media, and just staying true to your convictions, to your Christian convictions.
And you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know if a lot of people are just going to say, I'm not going to go to your restaurant anymore because I'm pro-gay, or, there's so many views on that you really have to stand for your convictions and just pray that God, works it all out for your business.
Yeah, and I remember hearing about through Cathys, the founder, his early years before he founded Chick-fil-A, how much suffering he had to go through his boot camp. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube if you YouTube it, Truth Cathys testimony or Truth Cathys the founding story or whatever. So inspiring because it was tough. I mean, he went through the grinder. It was a tough boot camp, and it's for most believers, when God wants to prepare you for something big, you're gonna have to go through that. And I don't know if you, dear listeners, I don't know if you're in your boot camp right now, if you've been out of it for 20 years and you just, as you're listening to us, you might be recalling those years and just smiling. But most of Christian entrepreneurs that I know have been through boot camp. And it's always interesting when you listen to that testimony. It's always so encouraging because there's great lessons to be learned there. Great lessons.
And sometimes, like in our case, what does that look like in the modern world? We talked about Moses, but today in the modern world in 2012, it was actually in 2012 when our journey actually began. We had been working for the government doing blue collar positions. We were working as clerks in a government position, so it was, hard work and steel toe boots and anyway, it was
warehouse setting,
yeah, with cages,
dust.
cages and lots of dust and hard times, working night shifts. I was pregnant at the time, and it was really, really rough, but we all did it because everybody wants those government positions. You say to yourself, I'm doing the best for my family, I'm getting good pay income and benefits and all that,
pension.
So, and we're not dissing anybody that is doing this kind of position. If they're happy doing it, then that's great, but we were really miserable doing it because at the time Sebastien was working very late. He was doing like a 3:30 to 11:30 shift. And I was working some days during the week and every weekend, Saturday and Sunday. So there was no time for us to go to church as a family, and it was like we had to. It wasn't like, I can switch some days. It was, I had no choice to go in Saturday and Sunday for full 8-hour shifts. So we never had a day where we could actually be together as a family. And at the time we had Jason. He was about 3 years old. And Marissa was going to be born. And when she was born in May of 2012, we said, you know what? This is not a quality of life. Like, we can't do this for years and years. And like, what's the point of having a family if you don't have any time to be together or to even go on a picnic on a Saturday? It just never worked. So we got on our hands and knees and we started praying to God and saying, there's got to be something better out there for us. And we had no idea that was going to open this journey for us, where Sebastien said, I really feel, that I should apply for a job transfer to Prince Edward Island, because we thought of, slower paced life, less traffic. We were like doing an hour and a half of traffic morning and night just to get to our jobs, right?
Yeah, and the rat race was really getting to us. I mean, this was an exhausting pace, and the pace itself was exhausting, but also when you're stuck in traffic and you feel like all you do is you're living to work and pay bills. And you feel like, and especially as a Christian, when you feel like life has no meaning, you wonder, like, is this why I was born? And that's not why you were born. And then again, as a Christian, sometimes you believe that when you accept Christ, that your purpose is to evangelize and evangelize and evangelize some more. But once you've gone full circle, you're like, well, there has to be more.
And we were evangelizing. We were talking to God a lot to people where we were working. Yeah. And God did use us the time that we were there. But we just knew that, at one point you look at your life and you see the different things that you've gone through. And I had a very different childhood as Sebastien did, and we both went through some hard times, and we're like, you look at it and you say, there's got to be a reason that God's using, that God made me go through all that. There has to be a purpose, it's not to, put one box from one other to the cage, just, like it was a very, mechanical job. And we just knew that there was more to our purpose, to our life. And, there's some people that will do this kind of job and it's okay. And they like chit-chatting with their friends and commuting, and they enjoy doing all that. But there's other people, Christian entrepreneurs, that God's intended to do something else for, and those are the people that are miserable on those type of jobs.
Yeah.
And it's because there's a calling there. There's something tugging in your heart telling you there has to be something else out there. I just don't know what it is. So when we began praying about it, and Sebastien applied to go to Prince Edward Island, I did too. I never got my job transfer. I never had a position here. So I basically lost my position. But Sebastien did get his. So we did move to the island, and it was a big ordeal because we had to move in the middle of winter with 2 young kids.
And a dog.
Jason was 3, Marissa was 8 months old. In the beginning,
And for American listeners, when we say in the middle of winter, we're not talking South Carolina winter. We're talking Canadian winter. Okay?
Yeah, Canadian winter in the end of February. So snow and just nasty weather. We had to drive 12 hours just to get to Prince Edward Island. It was actually funny because every night that we spent in a motel, the kids were like, "Are we home yet? Are we home yet?" It was so long to drive that they were getting discouraged.
We were exhausted. I remember the whole trip was so exhausting.
Anyway, so to make a long story short, we did get to the island. We did buy a house here. And not long after, we realized that our problems were following us. So Sebastien was working as a mail carrier, and he was doing a day position, which was better than what we were doing before. And we did have a quality of life in the sense that we had our weekends. So that was a big step for us. But we realized that God was tugging on our hearts and was telling us there's more to it. There's more there's a reason why he brought us here, right?
Yeah, and not only that, but I think we are, when we set out to move, we had a plan. We wanted to improve our finances. We wanted, if possible, to have mom stay at home with the young children. Right. The typical Christian family, mom stays home. Well, typical 20 years ago. Mom stays home, dad goes out and works, and then one salary is enough. And since the cost of housing was lower, that influenced our decision to move greatly. But there were a lot of things that kind of caught us sideways.
Right.
Once we moved, after a year and a half, we rebudgeted, and we realized, the budget we had on paper was one thing, but the reality of the cost of living, not that it was much worse than where we were in Quebec before, but let's just say it wasn't much better. And that's the thing that kind of hit us, because in Quebec 2 salaries were needed. Right. And so we were back to that. We're back to that reality. Like, okay, this didn't quite work out the way we expected. So I was very disappointed. I mean, I felt like a failure. I had dragged my family out of province, very far away, and so reality hit me first, because I'm the one who administrates the budget. But then I shared the numbers with Lizzie, and I sat down with her and I said, "Lizzie, this is not really working out. You're gonna have to bring in some money. I don't care if it's $200 a month, $300, 500, 5,000, great. But you're gonna have to bring in something so that we can pay our bills a bit better." And that's when, I think that was the moment where the entrepreneurial journey began. It began with Lizzie. It didn't start with me. It started with my wife, and she's always been more of the, the born entrepreneur. I think some people are more born entrepreneurs than others. Me, it was more out of necessity that I became an entrepreneur. But some other people have this desire from a young age, and I think Lizzie fit that bill. Anyway, she found herself in a situation. Okay, I'm home. I'm with young children. I don't want to put them in daycare. and I have to find something I'm going to do from home that's going to bring in some bacon to bring in a second salary. That's when she set out. Why don't you tell people about that a little bit?
Yeah, so I did several different things. I started a coastal decor business. So since we're in Prince Edward Island, I had the idea to do some coastal decor, beach decor for people's cottages. So that's how I started out. And then I realized, there was a lot of overhead. There's a lot of things that you need to purchase, and people didn't necessarily buy everything that you purchased for them to buy. So basically you lost a lot of money. And so it was just the beginning of learning what is the best type of business to be in. And we both came across a different business that we were passionate about, which was the health and wellness niche. And so we started our own online business in the health industry and really enjoyed doing that. And we both came across John Maxwell's content. So we were really inspired to start leadership trainings. And as you move forward, in personal growth, you realize that it's a whole other matrix. It's a whole other thing to be. We're used to learning spiritual growth in churches, but personal growth is different, and the two combine so well together. So as we were growing as Christian entrepreneurs together, Sebastien was like, wow, I have to do this training. I have to get certified through the John Maxwell team. And I was listening to the content, and I just thought it was really great. So we both got certified and both began our journey with leadership trainings and coaching. And, through this whole journey, I had realized that God had been prepping me for a really long time to be a coach. I just was always doing it naturally since I was a teenager. And I had never realized that there was actually a profession that existed until, I started studying all this content. So that's when Thriving on Purpose was born. Sebastien, maybe you can tell them about your background and why you wanted to start.
Well, before I joined the John Maxwell team, I hadn't gone back to school. I wanted to study to be a translator. And I kind of did it. I was motivated on one hand, and on the other hand, I wasn't too sure I liked it.
Right.
So at work, I started listening to motivational videos to motivate me in my studies. But I started really liking guys like Les Brown and Jim Rohn and even Tony Robbins. I mean, I started listening to these guys. I was like, whoa, wow, and then I started sharing some of these clips on YouTube with Elisabeth. And anyway, I'm just trying to make a long story short because we don't have like 2 hours here. But before my mom passed away, she said something to me that shook me to my core and made me realize I was not fulfilling my purpose. And it took me about 8 months after she passed for me to realize that what my specific purpose for myself, for me, the calling that God had on my life, what it was to be a Bible teacher and speaker and writer. I mean, that's the crux of it for me. I mean, that's what I'm supposed to do. And once I found that out, I was on fire. I was basically unstoppable. It hasn't stopped since. And so that's when I enrolled at the John Maxwell team because I needed more of a certification, I guess you would say, as a speaker, because I realized getting started as a speaker wasn't very easy to just say, hey, I'm a speaker. People wanted a little bit more. They wanted to know who they're dealing with. But like, are you certified? What can you bring to us? And so the John Maxwell team gave me not only the training I needed, but the confidence as well. And not long after I joined the John Maxwell team, like I said, I was on fire, it was crazy. And I got a great idea for a book. I wrote a book, sat down and started writing. Had a great idea. The idea was to mesh basically superhero characters, Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, Captain America, and their leadership abilities and their leadership traits, and to condense that in a book on leadership. So basically through the book, people get a clear picture of who they lead like by reading how Captain America leads like, how Wonder Woman leads like, how Superman leads like, and on and on and on. And I call the book "Lead Like a Superhero." It's a I'm doing a plug here. That's not my intent. I just wanted to tell you how on fire I was, and so I was highly motivated. And by the way, "Lead Like a Superhero" was not the just what I had learned with the John Maxwell team. It was years of reading prior to that was boiled down and condensed with everything I had acquired through all those years. Because, like Liz said, there's a difference between personal growth and spiritual growth. I was all about spiritual growth, and it works. I mean, there's obviously some great fruits that come from that.
Right.
But when I entered the personal growth arena, I realized there was some components that were missing in my life, and that kind of bridged it. That kind of like filled in those gaps, and it made me, I feel, a more complete person. Anyway, so I was able to boil down much of my leadership knowledge in one book, and I made it fun, and I was so motivated. I wrote it like, I think it's 7 months I wrote it, and I was going through my studies. I was working full time, had 3 young kids. Gives you an idea how on fire I was. Of course, it was hard. Liz at the time was following her John Maxwell training, but I forgot. Liz pointed out to me, my business guy. Forgot to tell you guys how Thriving on Purpose came to be. So basically, throughout all this, the name Thriving on Purpose means what it means. I mean, I believe it has 2 meanings, basically. It means that once you find your purpose, you will thrive. But it also means that you're going to thrive and it won't be an accident. You're not going to thrive by accident. You're going to thrive and it's going to be on purpose.
Right.
So it's like 2 meanings. So yeah, I founded like Thriving on Purpose very early on. I founded it before I even joined the John Maxwell team. I had the idea for the company and for my speaking organization and training organization. I just needed the credentials, and I went to get them with the John Maxwell team with the best training in the world by best trainers in the world.
Right. So he started doing some leadership trainings here in Prince Edward Island, and then God inspired us to both start working together. So that was a transition. I had been studying a lot about marketing, and we were both working the health niche, but we both felt that God was calling us to do more with Thriving on Purpose, and that's when we were inspired to speak to a Christian audience, to speak to Christian entrepreneurs, because we saw a need. We saw that there was a lot of things that we felt weren't being discussed in churches, because it just, I don't know why. Honestly, they should do more teachings for Christian entrepreneurs, but generally it's more, for relationships and teaching the Bible, and that's all good.
They teach us great stuff in churches, don't get us wrong.
Right.
But it's mostly about your relationship with God and your walk with God. And how can I put this? Not enough about the day-to-day grind and your calling and building something for God that He gives you as a vision and a mission, because we're born. He puts us on this earth, but He's got a purpose for us. He's got a mission for each and every one of us. And most people just walk right by that. They just miss the whole what's my purpose thing. And
because they're so set out to just get a job, make some money, have their family, lead them in God's way, and that's all good. But if God is tugging at your heart and teaching you more, then there's a purpose that He wants to use through you to glorify Him, then you have to find out what that is. And, we kind of like we put things into compartments, and, you have these people that are doing jobs, and then you have these other people that feel that they're being called by God to go into ministry. Mm-hmm. And so they get these trainings, and they get, these teachings about vision, about this and that, because they're in a different mission field. They're doing, they're planting churches, some are missionaries, they're doing God's work in a different way. But now in today's modern world, there's a lot of Christian entrepreneurs that are trying to do different things. I know some people that are doing all kinds of clever businesses that are glorifying God through all kinds of different things, through t-shirts, through jewelry, some through marketing, branding for Christian entrepreneurs. There's so much that you can do now today. So we really had it on our heart to start Thriving on Purpose from a Christian entrepreneur perspective, to really tackle the topics that we're all interested in. And we need, that inspiration when things really do get difficult. So we really hope that you're going to be inspired by our different podcasts. And we'd love to hear from you if you would like to talk to us about your boot camp and how your journey has been and where you're going, what your vision is. We'd love to hear your stories as well.
Yeah. And just to go back to the God's boot camp thing. So our boot camp was this. I mean, we left our families and we left what we knew. We left the province we knew, the city we knew, and we came to a new province and we wanted to make a new life for us. And the vision we had of it was pink. And then we realized, okay, no, we're here to be formed. And to some degree, and a pretty big degree, it was to be broken and taught by God and equipped by God to become who we're supposed to be. I mean, I never would have taken the venue of becoming a speaker and writer if it weren't out of necessity. I mean, when I was brought to the island, I was kind of forced into reinventing myself.
Right.
And it wasn't something that I was looking for, but it was something I needed. And it was something that God wanted to do through me. And I think that many Christian entrepreneurs, either they're reluctant entrepreneurs or they wanted to start a business since they were 10. I mean, God's going to have a process for you.
But they're scared of getting out of their comfort zone.
What they've known. T.D. Jakes often talks about the process, the importance of the process. Mm-hmm. And I fully agree with that. The process is just as important as the end goal or the mission that God gave you and the vision that God gave you. Right. Because through the process, and I often say this, I often repeat that in my teachings, well, you're probably going to hear me, as this is only the first podcast, but I often say the worker is the work. Mm-hmm. So through the process that God brings you through, he chips away all the unnecessary stuff, all the junk, he forms you, he molds you, he equips you to become more of what he wants for you to accomplish. So basically, he builds you up, he equips you to not only do a work, but to be a work.
Right.
So yeah, so that's God's boot camp. That's basically the crux of it. And I know most Christians are probably familiar with that in some way or another, especially if you're an entrepreneur. You have a different perspective, I suppose, or a different path that you've been on. So you're probably identify with not only what we said about ourselves, but about the story of Moses or people who have a certain mission and vision from God, and they know exactly where they're supposed to go, but they don't necessarily day by day know how to reach that, how to go. So you really have to trust God and grab his hand every step of the way. And sometimes, like any good parent, God's going to remove his hand. And you're going to have to walk alone for a while, not hearing from him, not knowing, not feeling his hand. And other times, just going to grab your hand again and you, okay, he's there.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because when I was saying our story, I forgot to mention, sometimes there's periods in your life where you feel that you really hear God strongly, and other times you feel like he just kind of abandoned you and you don't really know what's going on. And when we prayed in Quebec for him to get a job transfer, and we knew that he had to do something, we had to change our way of life because we just were miserable doing the jobs we were doing, and thought that it would be so much better coming to Prince Edward Island. when he opened those doors and everything happened quickly, we sold our house. Everything was like boom, boom, boom. We end up on the island. And after that 1.5 years, when the finances weren't working, Sebastien applied to return to Quebec because we thought at that time we made a mistake and we just were questioning God and just like, what happened? You know, we thought this was the right thing. And then we were doubting what God had told us at first.
Yes.
And that's a really, really a no-no. Because
that was our Abraham
a big
moment.
no-no.
When you remember in the scriptures when Abraham doubted, like God said he was going to have a son, and it just wasn't happening, and he started to doubt. And he's like, and his wife started to doubt. And they go with Hagar, the servant maid, and she's going to give you a son. And that was like our Abraham moment. We were like, well, okay, maybe we were wrong about this move. Let's just go back to Quebec and get. Long story short, God, the doors opened. We sold our house, got the transfer. So far it seems like, wow, okay, we're going back to Quebec. So we thought God was opening the doors. No way. He shut them in our face so fast. And I'm still reeling from that. It's like, what, it's been 3 years now? 4?
Yeah, like 4 years now.
Anyway, long story short, we were on our way to Quebec. We had packed the cars. We were going to go shopping for a house. That's how much we were convinced we were going back. And phone rings. We're on the highway in New Brunswick. We're about not halfway there, but maybe a third of the way there. Phone rings. It's Canada Post informing us that they made a terrible mistake, that I didn't get the transfer. And again, long story short, try to negotiate with them, say, you know what, it's your mistake, make it happen anyway. No, they wouldn't, because hey, it's the government, right? The government doesn't go back on their position. But anyway, so that door closed. But ultimately it was God closing the door. And he was saying, I ain't done with you yet. Come back. I didn't bring you to this island for nothing. And I still have a purpose. And I still have lots of equipping to do. And that's when ironically, that's when the equipping really started. And when that door shut, that major, huge, gigantic garage door slammed in our face, that's when God started really working our entrepreneurial endeavors, or I don't know what to call it. But basically, we had no I didn't have an entrepreneurial bone in my body. That's when he started doing like Wolverine, grafting adamantium into my skeleton. But it was more like entrepreneurism in my skeleton so that I would have an entrepreneurial bone in my body. And that's when the process began. In other words, what I'm trying to say is this, and I think it's going to encourage you guys. The doors that God closes in your face are just as important and beneficial to you as the doors that God opens wide.
Yeah.
Never forget that.
Because at that moment when that happened and we had to reestablish ourselves on the island and find a house, and by the way, I was 6 months pregnant. So that was with our third child, Caitlin. And I was like, we need a place to live. So when we actually went without a house for like 2 weeks, we were living like in a cabin somewhere, and we finally found a house again, and we reestablished ourselves on the island. That's when it was clear to us, okay, God clearly shut the doors. So, okay, we are here because he wants us to be here.
There you go.
It was like his way of confirming what we thought, like Sebastien says in our Abraham moment, that, you know, that we made the wrong mistake. He was really clearly showing us, no, this is where I want you guys. You're staying here. And we're
you're still
now
in
what?
my will. You're still in my will. Don't worry about it. I didn't bring you here for nothing.
Yeah. So, and that's when our prayers changed. Then we started praying prayers like, Lord, show us, you know, open our eyes to what it is exactly you want us to do.
Yeah.
You know, how are you going to use us, and show us the way. And, you know, the prayers were just different. And that's when he showed us step by step, and we just had to obey one step at a time. And then he'd show us more. Obey a step at a time, then he shows you more. It's kind of like he takes you one step at a time, right?
Yeah.
So I hope this encourages you guys to keep on persevering in your boot camp.
If you're in your boot camp right now, and I hope even if you're past your boot camp, right? Even if they're past their boot camp, even if it's been 2 years, if it's been 10 years, 20 years, I hope this encourages you anyway. Because when you're an entrepreneur, there's always something you're learning. There's always something you're going through. Mm-hmm. There's always some problems arising. And there's these tiny bootcamp moments that show up along the way. And I hope this episode of God's Bootcamp encourages you to keep going, no matter where you find yourself on your entrepreneurial journey.
Right.
And the desire to glorify God in your life, but also in your business. And we would love to hear from you guys. If this podcast has encouraged you, let us know. Write to us at info@thrivingonpurpose.com. No, is that it?
That's it.
Yeah, info@thrivingonpurpose.com. Write to us. Let us know if this podcast has encouraged you in any way, shape, or form. And we are looking forward to, talking with you next week. Same bad place, same bad channel. All right, guys. God bless, and may you thrive on purpose.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening to the Thriving on Purpose podcast. Be sure to visit thrivingonpurpose.com to access the show notes and to discover more fantastic content. Until next time, be blessed and may you thrive on purpose.